Good evening, everyone. Welcome, and we're all so delighted to have you here to watch this important and interesting movie. My name is Nancy Burgoyne. I'm the Chief Clinical Officer at the Family Institute at Northwestern, and we are delighted to be participating with Nutrier in bringing this event to you and creating an opportunity for you to ask some questions. How this is going to work is we have a panel here that I'll introduce, and you've gotten note cards as you walked in, and if you have questions that you would like to ask the panel, please feel free to jot them down. We do ask you to keep them more general. We won't be able to respond to very specific circumstances for individual children in this context. But we certainly hope to get to issues that are of general importance to you. Once you've filled out your card, if you can sort of wave it in the air, and Crystal or one of the team will take it from you and they'll assemble them, and then those will come up to me and I'll ask at the end of the evening. So we're gonna start with our panel, though, who I'd like to introduce. Here is Dawn Livorsi, Dr. Dawn Livorsi, one of our go-to child and adolescent family therapists at the Family Institute. Megan Zajac, who's the Director of Special Education at Nutrier. And we have Nutrier's two talented psychologists, Dr. Hannah Kreps and Dr. Nikki Slade. Thank you all for being here, and I'm going to throw some questions at them, and we'll go ahead and get started. I think the movie is so compelling and had so many moving moments in it. And so I really just wanted to ask the panel, who work with kids all the time and kids who struggle with ADHD, was there something that stood out to you, something that resonated for you, something that came to the fore in this movie that spoke to you that you'd like to share with the audience? And I'll open it up to anyone who wants to start.
I'll start. So something I work with students often about, any of their areas of weakness and strengths, right? We all have them. Is I use the word superpower. So the fact that they use that as well was always, reassuring to me as well. But when I'm working with students, I'm trying to teach them to be, embracing of their uniqueness and, strive for their strengths and recognize those areas that are not as strong and what you can do about it. So I really liked that was emphasized in the movie. The other piece is each individual had their own story, and how it impacted them is very different amongst them all. And I think that's really important. You've met one person with ADHD, you met one person, and how that looks for them and how it feels for them is unique, and so you have to be there to listen and guide.
Makes sense.
So this is probably my third or fourth time watching the movie, and each time I watch it, it is really hard to see the impact that some of the teachers in the school have had on the students, and that's just not the philosophy that we embrace around here. We think all of our students have amazing gifts and talents, and we want to ensure that we're bringing them out. So it's really hard to actually sit and watch that and knowing that that's not how, in a situation that I respond, but it's a reality for people.
So one of the things that struck me was the amount of resiliency. Does this one work? Yeah. All right, sorry for making things complicated. So one of the things that struck me was the resiliency and the amount of love within the kids and within the families, and that the people that were in this documentary were brave enough to show us that it's sometimes messy, but they were learning and they were growing together and celebrating those achievements and those milestones, and really working together and trying to find their way and support each other through everything. Hello? Okay.
similar to what you just said, I had a reaction to the level of commitment that the parents put forth. Both the parents and the kids, to kind of work on this. It requires a lot, and I think every time I've seen it, I've had that kind of moment of like, wow, this is not easy.
This is not easy indeed. And Dawn, can we just stay with you? Can you walk us through some of the complexities of diagnosing ADHD and the kinds of things that parents and guardians wonder about?
Sure.
About a kid who they think has ADHD?
Sure. It's a process. So I think that's one thing that I'd like parents to hear, or parents and guardians to hear, is that you don't typically walk into a therapist's office and then walk out with a diagnosis that day. A good diagnosis typically is done in collaboration with other people who work with the child, teachers, other adults. We'd want to see some consistency of behavior in multiple environments. So not just my kid gets fidgety when we go to mass on Sunday, right? Like that's a fairly typical thing. We would want to see some kind of global, behavior, at school, at home, with friends, in different places. I think about developmental age. I think about language, their ability to, have insight to talk about what's going on for them. I think about what's going on in their home lives, what's going on in their social lives, what's going on intrapersonally. How are they sleeping? Are there other medical conditions? When's the last time they had a hearing or eyesight test? Even things like that sometimes can impact. I think about, I guess all the areas of a kid's life is something that you want to take into context, when we're thinking about what's going on behaviorally or diagnostically.
Yeah, that's one of the complications, right, is that we can observe a child in a given context and things may align with ADHD, but if it's not showing up in multiple contexts, then typically that diagnosis isn't a fit. So I do want to talk about New Trier's support structures because they're pretty remarkable. And I wonder, Megan, if you would like to talk about the structure for students experiencing who have ADHD or other academic and social difficulties. What does New Trier's support structure look like for those kids?
So I actually talked a little with Hannah beforehand because I wasn't totally sure how I wanted to answer this question.
Sure.
But what really kind of struck me when we were talking is the thinking about supporting students has changed over time. So prior to 2009, it was really they were still doing that wait and see and wait for a student to fail model. And then it was, about, responding to that one student who might be struggling. And in the recent years, it's shifted to supporting all students. So that, it goes back to what they said and when they were talking about the breast cancer diagnosis, to make sure that you're getting everyone. And so that's really what multi-tiered systems of support, or MTSS, is about. So several years ago, right around the pandemic, we were already moving to that shift, and we actually did an entire school in-service about MTSS and the structures that can be embedded into every classroom, kind of what we call the tier 1 level, because that's what all the students are receiving. So we sent out strategies in the area of academic, social, emotional, and behavioral that any teacher could use and implement in their classroom. And some of the, just basic structures were, providing guided note sheets, doing some cueing for attention. In terms of social emotional support, it was just kind of that checking in with that student, making sure that they're doing well. And then we have a system in place where if we feel that a student might require additional supports, we're collecting feedback from a variety of sources and bringing a team together to look at all the information we have on the student, and then maybe recommending additional supports. There might be some academic supports where somebody's working on developing some time management strategies. There may be some social emotional supports where we're maybe recommending a mentor that's in the building that the student can work with, or some social work supports, depending on what we're finding that the student is requiring.
That makes a lot of sense. Does a student need to have an IEP to receive that type of support?
No, and so I was actually thinking, it was perfect, because I was thinking about in the movie where that woman talked about people jump to special ed services really before providing any supports. We actually like to go through this process to see if a student needs supports above and beyond that. And so if it is determined that our other interventions are not working, then we will look to see whether a student requires kind of that individualized instruction in order to make academic progress.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a tremendous amount of sense, and what a great set of resources. Nikki and Hannah, I wonder if you want to add to that at all in terms of insights that you have about how teachers and staff handle complexities of diverse learners, and maybe even the counseling staff at New Trier. Are there other things that you wanted to add to that picture?
Yeah, I think the piece of the changing and evolving student is huge, right? And post-COVID and the stress of that, wow, we had a lot of students coming in with unique needs and missing that social development and that academic development as we went remote. And so we put some systems in place to help our students, especially the freshman campus, right? We got to boost those skills of independence and putting in systems in place like our freshman success program and other things to help boost executive functioning skills. We also recognize that this is a huge learning boost for all students. And this brain development period, whether you have ADHD or not, you need support in those skills of independent functioning and managing your workload and things like that. And then we have students who need more than that. And so how do we develop that specific strategy to support those students is continuing to evolve as our students show us what their needs are. So freshman success, we have different programs within our school community to help with those more intensive interventions, working on time management, working on emotional regulation and other things. I don't know, Nikki, if you have more.
Okay. So, it doesn't like it. No, it doesn't. So one thing really is also looking at the strengths-based approach, where we really try to help students understand what they can do and how they can build off of those strengths in order to lift up maybe some of those places where they may struggle, and really try to target those skills that we work on and try to really look at those things that they can do, because that does help with that self-efficacy, that the way that they view themselves, not only in the classroom, but then when they're dealing with peers and things like that.
Passing the baton here. I'm struck by the references in the movie and with all of you to this strength-based point of view, which I think makes a tremendous amount of sense. And it's not always easy to step into when you have a kid that is struggling and behaving in ways sometimes that are challenging. So one of the things I'm wondering about, Dawn, is how you see the interaction between ADHD and, for example, anxiety that we know is so prevalent today.
Thank you. Good question. So we see quite a bit of that. We see quite a bit of co-occurrence between ADHD and anxiety. About 30% of kids who have ADHD also experience very high levels of anxiety. So what this might look like is, I think it speaks to the need for really good assessment so that providers, teachers, parents, everybody who works with a kid can kind of understand the nuance of what's going on with that kid. Typically, when I see kids with anxiety, they have very high standards for themselves, sometimes almost perfectionistic. So then we've got kind of this ruminating worry, this anticipatory worry about what if I get it wrong, what if I forget, what if I don't get my checks or my pluses or whatever. And that exacerbates the attending problems, right? Because they're thinking about that instead of being able to really focus on instruction or stay kind of with their class. So often we see it exacerbate. Sometimes these are the kids who can look more inattentive as opposed to hyperactive. They may be more internalizing as opposed to externalizing. So I think it just speaks to our need as adults who care to be aware of the difference so that we can address the different concerns. It's an anxious world out there. There's a lot to worry about for all of us probably, but students included. So to just have some empathy and some understanding of that, I think, is very helpful.
That goes a long way. Hannah, you threw out the executive functioning term, and that adds more complexity to the mix. Can you say a little bit about what that is And because it might seem obvious, but maybe not so much.
Yeah, so, you know, executive functioning skills are those skills that we all have that keep us on time and making to appointments and getting due dates and things like that, right? But it's also the emotional regulation piece. So there's three main components for executive functioning. There's the cognitive skills, there's the behavioral functioning, as well as the emotional regulation. And so that part of the brain is still developing in our adolescence, right? Actually, it develops all the way up into your mid-20s. So there's, you know, that continued growth. And there's a lot of things that are normal about it. That's one thing I like about the documentary. It talked about a lot of these areas of strength and need are seen in all of us as humans. It's about the impact that it has. It's about the level of support you need in order to develop the compensatory skills to function in our world, right? And so when we think about cognitive things, we think about like our working memory, right? You walk into the kitchen and you go, dang, why did I come in the kitchen? And you walk out of the kitchen, you're like, oh man, I wanted water. You go back to the kitchen and get your water. That's working memory. That's a simple example of all of us have probably had that experience, but a working memory deficit and the way that looks in school when you're listening into auditory processing, you're synthesizing it, now you're putting in your notes. We have to learn a new strategy to do that easier. When it comes to your behavioral skills, chunking assignments, putting things in an assignment notebook, managing due dates so that you're not cramming the night before something. That's not something that's innate. That's something that we have to learn. And some individuals need to learn it differently so that it works in how they function in the world and how, you know, it's a consistent manner. So we have to teach that for all students, and some students need it to be taught individualized for them because of the way their brain views and lends that piece. Emotional regulation, right? That has to do with that, you know, impulsive responding, that stop and think before. I love the piece of the impulsive, I got the decision, I got the idea, and I gotta get it out right now or I'm gonna lose it. That's part of that emotional regulation, that ability to be a good listener, the ability to hold your answer, the ability to wait and maybe not get called on for like 3 or 4 hands up, right? That's really hard for humans, and that's school. So those skills are the big pieces that go in. I mean, we can break that down even further to starting a task, sustaining a task. All of those are little things. So those big 3 categories actually go down to smaller skill sets. And when we drill it down to that smaller area of strength and need, we can use that strength-based approach. We can use something they're strong at to teach them a compensatory skill so that they can be more independent. Because we all know our adolescents want to be independent, right? And we do as adults too. We want to be successful. We want to get that thing on time and get kudos from our boss, right? So, you know, taking that human piece to it is all.
You know, I'm curious in saying that, Hannah, if you or if anybody else, would that be part of what you would recommend to parents and caregivers who have kids that have ADHD, is sort of using that compensatory strategy that you talk about? So you're identifying a strength. Like, how would the school partner with parents, and what kinds of suggestions would you be giving parents around that?
I mean, I've worked with families, everything from like, how the heck do we get out the door to get out here on time, right? That's a challenge. And the way that needs to look is very unique to your home. So it's really hard for me to throw out really specific things that work for each individual, because one problem could have 50 solutions. And that's the beautiful thing about it, right? 50 different solutions means, ooh, there's hope. But you gotta find the one that works for you. I feel like sometimes the hardest piece is we're stuck in our routines as adults. And when you hear the parents in this video, what you're hearing is, I got this strategy, I got this strategy, I just this strategy, and then, man, I struggle with this too. So how am I supposed to lead somebody with something that I'm not so great at either? And so I really like to work with parents and ask a lot of questions and really try to get a sense of what it looks like and what worked well in the past and what doesn't work well. Because what I don't want to do for any teacher, any parent, is I want to give them a suggestion that they can't do, because then it's not effective. And I always joke with my teachers, I said, okay, if this is a 3-ring circus idea and you only got 1 ring, let me know, because we got to scale it back. There's nothing wrong with that. But I need to meet you where you are and help guide you through that. So it's a communication, and it's vulnerable, and you have to keep it going.
That theme of a lot of focused on the individual and crafting it from there is what I'm hearing across the board. I don't know if anyone else wanted to add to that. And it's okay if you do. Yeah, give me something. Okay.
Okay, so I'll try not to talk so loud this time. So, kind of looking at that, like within the classroom and within the family, right, that I just want to acknowledge that under the best of circumstances, it's really hard to be a parent, right? And under the best of circumstances, it's really, really difficult to be an adolescent and trying to navigate your social life and figuring out who you are now and who you want to become, and coming to school every single day and having these responsibilities. That's all really, really tough. And I feel like we as educators and providers all really acknowledge that and want to help our students move through this phase of their life and help them build those skills so that they can be independent, functioning human beings, not just in the school setting, right? Not just in our home with that support, but as they move forward and as they continue on with their lives. And so a lot of times, a lot of the things that work in school also work at home. It just looks a whole lot different, right? Because it's that different setting. So, these things with routines, right? Routines work really well in the classroom. And now your kids' teachers may have different routines in their classrooms, but they will know, like in science class, this is what we do every day. Like we come in, we review the agenda, then we move on to, a quick, reading quiz, and then we move into the lab activity, right? At home, when I come home, I'm gonna come home and have my snack, then I'm gonna spend a half hour doing my homework, and think whatever really works for your family. And I loved in the movie with Reese where, he was like, I don't need these notes, I don't need these reminders, and then he's like, I didn't look at them one day, and guess what, they work, right? So, that's another thing that sometimes when we try these strategies, sometimes when we first implement them, it can be tough to stick with them when we feel like we're putting in all this effort, we're putting in all this work, and it's just not working. But that consistency piece and giving it that time to stick, and then figuring out like, well, what about, maybe it wasn't a total failure, but what about it worked for us? What about it didn't? And what are some, modifications that we can make together? And I think that piece is also really, really important it seems obvious, but sometimes we don't stop in our busy lives to have those conversations and really look at each other and like, well, what didn't you like about this? Well, your kids will tell you a lot of information, and you can tell them information like, well, I didn't like when, I had to wake you up 5 times this morning. That really frustrated me, right? So how can we make this better? So those little things, like, where we see those in the classroom, we can see those same things at home, that can be really helpful and can open up that dialogue and can, open up that communication and that trust, and have, that become a partnership at home with your child, just like in the classroom. When we take the time to build those relationships, when we take the time to notice, hey, you know what? I noticed that you got your book out right away when I asked you to. That was really great. I appreciate that. That allowed us to move on with our lesson, right? So those little pieces really do build up and really do kind of encourage those positive things and those strengths that we want to keep encouraging to keep the students going.
Yeah, that makes a tremendous amount of sense to me. Well said, Nikki. That makes a lot of sense. Dawn, I don't know if when parents get a confirmed diagnosis of ADHD, it sounds like, the kinds of things that Nikki said would fit very well with what a therapist would say. I didn't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
No, I support, I think a lot of what you just said is correct. Things like using a visual schedule, using routines, things like that are really helpful. I would say specifically to parents or caregivers to consider getting your own help and your own support, for good or bad. Your kids are no better than you are, right? Like how you are functioning is going to have an impact on them. And so you're also modeling for them. So you want to kind of make sure you're caring for yourself, whether that's formal or informal, whether that's a therapist or a group, or whether it's informally with other moms or parents that you know that are dealing with similar things. Also, I would say work with your school. There's tremendous supports there, resources, ideas. they see a lot of this and they have a lot to offer, and it's there for you. So I would say make use of that, get your own support and your own care. You deserve that.
Makes sense. Great advice. I'm going to ask just one more question of the panel, and so Crystal, I'll go ahead and take those questions now because I know it's warm and I know it's late. And so I want to be very respectful of your experience out there. So just for the whole panel, can you share a little bit what you think the biggest misconceptions are of ADHD? When you think about that diagnosis and what gets called to mind sort of colloquially, how's it a mismatch with what you know as educators and as a therapist?
So I think one of the biggest misconceptions, in my opinion, is that that people think that students can't focus. The reality is they're focusing on everything. They can feel the material on the back of the chair. They can hear the clock ticking. They can hear that airplane going by. I mean, they are able to. They're focusing on everything. And so I think it's just a misconception because I think people say they're not paying attention. Well, they are. They're just not paying attention to you. So we need to figure out ways to get them to ensure that they're paying attention to what's happening in that setting.
Yeah, one of the things I think is that ADHD or any other diagnoses does not define the person, right? They are a very special individual that has a lot to offer, and people around them need to be willing to see that and work with them on that, and they need to be able to, to see those strengths and to see that individuality and those, what they call their super skill set, right? And just to learn how to be who they are and to use those things that make them unique and that to make them, be the best person that they can become and learn and grow and just keep going at it.
I would say a misconception that I see is that, I think there's two things, but they're connected. One is that misbehavior is willful, like kids are acting out, and I can appreciate, if you say the same thing every day for many, many days, it can feel like, how don't you know this? But my true belief is that most everybody wants to have a good day, wants to do a good job, doesn't want to get in trouble, wants to have positive reinforcement. So I think, kind of getting rid of that idea that this behavior is willful or intentional in some way. And then the other is that kids with ADD or ADHD are lazy, which I would really argue with. I think they're working much harder, in fact, than some of their peers. So not to make a comparison, it's not a contest, but they're working very hard to stay regulated, stay on track, to try to attend. All these things that we may not see, they're under the surface, but they're certainly happening.
She stole mine, which is the lazy comment. It's like the thing that gets under my skin when somebody says, the student's just lazy. There's something else there, right? And what I think more about is the inconsistency, right? This is really challenging. One day they did it, the next day they can't. They hit the mark here, they don't hit the mark here. Why? And that's something that we see with individuals with this brain makeup, right? It's about their focus and attention, their ability to regulate that in the moment, shifts day to day, moment to moment. And I love what Nikki said about the relationships piece, because that's key. If you don't really have a good relationship and really understand, then you might say they're lazy, they're inconsistent, they just don't want to. When in reality, if you have that good relationship, you see it's really a difficult time with regulating their attention focus, regulating their skills and performing at that level consistently.
Something that I would add to that, if I may, is that one of the reasons you might see in kids with ADHD some behaviors that look like lazy is because ADHD can really lead kids to other vulnerabilities like anxiety, like depression, which can show up in those ways because it can be such a painful experience socially and emotionally and academically, and so other problems can follow from that. And that can add to the complexity and the challenge of dealing with it. So when you're just thinking ADHD clean, it's going to look like one thing, but most things, certainly most things that come into our offices don't have those clean margins like that. It's very complex, and so you see lots of things woven in there. So I'm gonna ask a few questions, and this one rose to the top right away as a misconception in my opinion. Is it possible to have ADHD and excel at school? Yes, indeed. Go ahead.
I think, yes, absolutely. I think the piece that really pops out is what they said in the video, right? The hyperactive individuals. And when they said the piece about the highly intelligent individuals being able to mask better, yeah, a lot of people aren't diagnosed till adulthood, as we saw. Or all of a sudden when our children are diagnosed, we're like, wait, that's me too. Oh, okay, right? So absolutely.
Yeah, and along with that, is ADHD considered a spectrum disorder? Do we see it on a spectrum? I don't know if you want to answer that, Tom.
Of impairment, do they mean?
No, the person with the diagnosis. Can you have severe ADHD and not so severe ADHD, or is it does it look like always look like one thing?
That's a good question. My hunch is that it can be on a spectrum from more severe to less. I think some of that is how do we learn how to cope? You know, how does it manifest then, given how we've learned to cope? So certainly, yeah, I think we see more mild cases and more severe, for sure.
That makes sense. Okay, an interesting question here is, and this follows beautifully from the film, which was very poignant about peer relationships. How do you help high school students develop friendships with their peers when they're so in their own way? I love the way that that's put. And they have difficulty reading the room, difficulty making connections with others. Can imagine how poignant that is to witness as a parent.
So I think there are a number of ways where we really do encourage all of our students to be involved in at least one activity, whether within the school day or after school activities. And there's such a large array that really the hope is that there is something that appeals to someone. Beyond that, there are, certain things, within the day that allow students to try to, build friendships. Or one thing that sticks out is that we're doing lunch with a purpose this year. So students that maybe don't have friends during their lunch period, that sometimes this is available where they can just sit and be with other people, right? So there's certain things like that that are available to students both within the day and outside of the school day. There are affinity groups that are run within the school as well to try to build that community. So lots of different avenues based on different interests or different levels of, engagement with other peers.
Makes sense. Does anybody else want to add to that?
I was just going to say there's, for our students who have a greater impact, right? They don't have that social lens. They are not picking up on science. I could actually probably pass the mic over to one of our social workers over here who leads some of these groups. We actually explicitly teach that. How do you read a social cue? How do you end a conversation? How do you start a conversation? How do you hang out? Because play dates were done a long time ago, right? Like mom or dad is not doing my agenda anymore. Oh my God, it's on me. How do I get their phone number? So we actually teach people that explicitly if that's needed, and that's available for students.
I also think some of that's taught in the advisory system and some of the lessons. So there's multiple avenues that students are able to receive that support.
Exploit your school's resources, encourage your kids to engage in these, because it's pretty remarkable that New Trier offers that, to be perfectly honest with you. That's not true of lots of other schools, so you're certainly fortunate in that way. I'm gonna ask this hard question because it's a brave question, and I want to make sure to ask it because it also speaks to the experience of parents that I think is very normal and very understandable, but also very poignant. What advice do you have for a parent who finds ADHD behavior disrespectful? What tools could a parent have to help to not themselves be reactive to that or find their child's impulsive behavior rude? Right? This is I completely understand where this parent is coming from, but what a tough interaction to be having. Anybody want to take a stab at that? Dawn, that's you.
I'll try. I'll do my best here. I would say, think about, you may have to shift your lens, okay? You may have to start looking through the world a little, so perhaps educate yourself, do some reading, get some good books and some good information. But then maybe start to look through the lens as what you'd said about, it's not that they're not paying attention to you, they're paying attention to everything, right? So kind of shifting that way of what else could be going on for my kid other than they're choosing to be rude, right? Could it be that they're overstimulated? Could it be that they are overwhelmed? Are they having a difficult time staying still in a situation when they're being expected to stay still? So I think there's any number of things. It requires a lot from parents and caregivers. I think that's kind of calling back to my last comment about getting your own support. I think that's why it's necessary. The better you are, the better your baseline of self-care is, I think the less those things are going to feel like irritants. And the more you educate yourself and kind of understand your child's experience, I think that will help too.
I agree with the compassion piece, but there's a rule. I have a house full of 4 teenage girls. As a parent, yeah, it's fun, right? You feel me? And
God bless you.
Regardless, I know, but you're magic. But I'm human, right? And part of just having adolescents in the home is very challenging. And there's a lot of disrespect and pushing of the boundaries. And then we add a frontal lobe disorder, and oh my goodness, it really pushes you to the limit. And so we have a rule in my house. I'm just going to share this little tip. We don't talk until we're not mad. So I'm human, and you can get my goat pretty quick. And let me tell you, my kids really know exactly what to do to push mom's buttons, right? Especially when they're all vouching for attention. So I just have a rule that we can't talk about it until I'm calm. And I'll say, I need space. We're going to talk about this in 5 minutes. And I go and do a little self-care. I go and separate, and I wait until I get calm. Because a child will not listen if you're not calm. An adult will not listen if you're not calm. I don't want to listen to somebody who's mad at me. No, I'm not going to process that. I'm going to be irritated. And when you're irritated and you're in any moment of extreme emotion, nobody's listening and nobody's hearing. So that was my one tip, because I know that sometimes it's hard to do as a parent, is take a step back and wait. And it's okay to wait to have the conversation. It's also okay to be human and have a human emotional moment and come back later and say, that was hard for me, and I did not respond the way I wanted to. And I yelled because I was frustrated, but I also want to talk with you now that I'm calm. Can we talk? And sometimes the kids say, no, because they're still mad. So we have to wait till they calm down too, but that's my one big tip.
I just want to add to it. I do think this goes back to the deficits kind of with social skills, and just maybe not even being aware. Like this, your child not being aware of their responses to you, and sort of actually directly teaching some of those skills, whether it's a social language group or it's family therapy or something where the student is being taught those skills, and understanding when they respond that way, your reaction, like how you feel, because they also miss sort of those subtle cues because of the ADHD.
Sure. So I am also a parent with a teenage child with ADHD, and so I remember when my son was younger where his therapist and all well-meaning people would be like, well, he just does that to you because he loves you so much, and you're the one that he can dump all your stuff on. And while I knew it was true, I was just like, but I don't want to be that, right? Like, that's really, really hard. And the reactions change and things change as our kids grow up. And now that he's an adolescent, and I've had years of practice with it too, right? That I, again, like Hannah, like I am human too. And sometimes I have that human reaction, but then go back and talk about it because I want to model that behavior of owning my behavior, recognizing like, you know what, I yelled back at you and I'm not proud of that. And so let's talk about this, let's go through this. This is how I would have liked to handle it. when I've got myself together, and sometimes it happens, and it's, I say what I want to say in my head, but I don't say it out loud, and take that breath and just kind of look, and sometimes it's just, that really hurt my feelings, and I don't think you wanted to do that, so why don't you tell me what you really want to say? And sometimes he's not ready, and then that's the break time. But I think that just kind of taking a beat yourself, and then also giving yourself that grace to be human, but coming back to it and owning that, because that's part of that explicit instruction piece that Megan was talking about, because then we're actively teaching those healthy behaviors about how to repair relationships, but also talking about those ways that are appropriate to behave and interact with others as well.
Yeah, and if I could add to this, I think there's no substitute for talking to parents who have been there, talking to people who have been in your shoes and understand what it's really like. It's really difficult. And there is an organization called CHADS, and this is in response to a question about support groups and in response to this conversation, CHADD.org. And it's a really remarkable organization that helps folks with ADHD across the lifespan, and also parents and caregivers of kids with ADHD. They have videos, they have book recommendations, they have local chapters. So I would encourage folks, in addition to this great advice that you're getting here, to reach out to this organization. Get connected, because there's nothing like somebody that gets where you're coming from, to feel seen and heard. And I think to calm down, it really helps to feel seen and heard. A question that came up about the diagnosis itself, which I think is a point of confusion generally, because diagnoses over time change how things are classified, and this is an example of one of them. Whatever happened to just ADD? Is the question. There used to be ADD, ADHD, now it's just all one umbrella. Does anybody want to speak to a little bit of that evolution in the diagnosis? Do you want to, or I can if you want to. Do you want to go ahead? Okay, I will then. So it used to be several classifications, and now it's all under one umbrella called ADHD, and that's the politics of psychiatry and psychology to a certain extent. And the research on it, because it evolves over the course of time and doesn't look the same in every developmental stage. And so we do still classify kids and adults as inattentive type or hyperactive or mixed, but it's all under one umbrella. It's a technical change in the diagnosis, just for your edification and response to this question. It's a great question, yeah. I'll take a couple of more questions. Is it difficult or different diagnosing this in kids identified as boys and girls? And is there a certain age where this shows up, or before which we shouldn't be thinking about a diagnosis for kids for this? Anybody want to take that? Yeah.
I guess I'll speak a little bit historically. I think historically we used to see this kind of overdiagnosed in boys and underdiagnosed in girls. And some of that is socialization. Girls tended not to behave in disruptive ways in the classroom in the way that boys did in some instances. And so, the boys would kind of get identified and the girls might get skipped. And I might say that hurts everybody, right? Like to be overdiagnosed or to be underdiagnosed kind of hurts everybody. I think we've gotten better at it. I don't think it's perfect. I think that is the beauty of having the multiple collaborators on a diagnosis. So if you've been through this process, you might know, your child's teacher has filled out a scale and you've filled out a scale, maybe a coach, other people involved have given feedback. And I think that helps us get closer to it. I don't know if anybody else wants to add.
So the educational diagnosis model and the formula that we use for that in the medical model are similar, but not exactly aligned, and in a lot of ways should be the same. So there's rating scales, and there's assessments, and there's, you know, a lot of different tools that we can use to try to find that strengths and need profile. The other piece is looking at, again, across different environments and settings over a long period of time. And so I think this has been a big challenge in the educational world, right? Post-COVID, we have students who are under a lot of stress. And when we're under a lot of stress, our frontal lobe is overwhelmed. And so we have students and adults, to be honest with you, who are now struggling with some of this attention and focus and, you know, monitoring that. But when we look back in the history, it wasn't there. And so that's when we want to support that, but maybe it doesn't quite meet that long-term piece. You can typically see elements of that profile from very early in childhood. And I mean, I've read back to preschool assessments and I'm like, oh, there's an indicator, there's an indicator, there's an indicator, right? But they didn't get that formal diagnosis until much older. Because we want to try to intervene. We want to try to support the skill development. We want to make sure that we rule out every probable reason before we say, oh, this is a biological, chemical brain development thing that's going to be lifelong. And so we have to do our due diligence with that in the educational system. So when I'm looking at this profile of a high school student, yeah, I'm going back to kindergarten report cards. Yeah, I'm reading those. I want to see what the teacher said. Did they have indicators there? Has this been pervasive over a long time? How has it changed over their educational career and how it impacts them? So, I mean, I dropped a few other little things in there, but yeah, I mean, I don't know about anybody else, but man, shifting from remote learning to coming back into the classroom and being back in the building was a big shift for me. Mm-hmm. Getting my children out the door on time and getting here on time and remembering that did I leave my charger on the dining room table, right? It's so much easier when it was just all right there. I have to use different executive functionings now. And so there's a little bit of a lapse from that. So I think that that's one challenge that I find educationally with this diagnosis post-pandemic and how it's impacted all of us.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm going to ask a final question out of respect for all of your time, and thank you for your patience in sticking around. A number of folks asked a question about how to get help. What kind of help? Is it a therapist? Is it an ADHD coach? Is it at school stuff? Is it therapy? How can I help my kid? How can I best help my kid with this? And I'm guessing that varies quite a bit, but I'm going to ask our panel to give their thoughts on that.
I would say everything you just mentioned. I think you know your kids, you know, and you know what would work best. But any of all of those, I think would be a good place to start. Starting with a pediatrician is a great idea. They often know the kid well, they have the medical history, they can rule things out. Moving into a therapist, it's common that I see families in family therapy where somebody has ADHD. And that's very helpful, I think, in just coming up with things like routines, or how do we have this kind of persistent issue, conflict, how do we resolve that? So I think, you know, individual therapy, family therapy, group therapy, any of that based on your child's needs.
And so I think too, in the movie, they touched on it, that, you know, that a lot of the therapies and learning those coping strategies and coping skills has fallen by the wayside in recent years. And those things are really, truly important, because those are the things that are going to last your child their life. And those are the things that are going to help them get through when homework's really hard, or when they have a really difficult friendship, you know, situation, that they have these coping strategies and these different skills that they can use to help them endure these difficult times, for when they're here in school, for when they're at home, but then when they go on, and if they're going off to college or in the workplace, when they are dealing with adversity or difficult things, or trying to learn something that's really hard, that they have these skills that they've started building at a younger age, that they can take with them to deal with these adversities as life goes on.
I was going to say, again, from the high school lens, involve your child in this process. So encouraging them, or even supporting them and co-going with them to talk to, is their advisor the most trusted adult? Is it their English teacher? Do they have a social worker that they have a relationship, or a psychologist? Have they ever been to the drop-in center when they're having challenging time with emotional regulation? Have they gone to the AAC to get some help with that writing assignment that they're stuck and they're blocked on? So there are so many resources. I mean, New Trier is a really blessed place, right? But it can be overwhelming, especially for the child with ADHD. Holy cow, there's a lot of options. And so facilitating and co-facilitating that conversation, encouraging your child to write the email and CC you on it. Write it together to the advisor or the person that they feel. I feel like the most trusted adult is your go-to. And if you're not sure who that is, start with the advisor, but loop your child in. If it's happening to them, they're adolescents. They don't like things to happen to them, right? In the video, they said they want control. I mean, every human wants control. So involve them, encourage them to be an active participant in seeking those supports, and they'll engage more with it.
You hit most of mine, although the question does make me, think about, like, are there seminars that we should be putting on for parents to help support their students?
It's a great idea. The best help is the help that will be accepted. One of the best strategies I've seen as a family therapist is when parents come into therapy with their kids, all of them, and the frame that they bring in is, we want to figure out how to work better as a family, and we want to figure out how to better support one another, and therefore the person with ADHD or another diagnosis is not singled out as the only one that needs to figure things out. Because very often there's a relational context around this, that if you can improve that, and then you can take advantage of the extraordinary resources at New Trier, that can be a very successful combination. So I would encourage you to consider thinking about both of those things if it's a fit for your family. Thank you all very much for your time and your attention. Thank you, panel, for all your thoughts and wisdom.